Chapter 11 of The Clue of the New Pin by Edgar Wallace. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Yoganand. The Clue of the New Pin. Chapter 11. A murder lends to the locality in which it is perpetrated a certain left-handed fame which those of its inhabitants who appear most disgusted most enjoy. Human nature being what it is, trouble and misery have a larger sale value to newspapers than have comfort and happiness. Nothing makes a newspaper reader more conscious of the emptiness of his journal than to learn that his insignificant neighbor has unexpectedly inherited a fortune. Therefore, it is only natural that when the average man or woman finds himself or herself promoted from mere observer to participant, however indirect, he or she experiences a queer satisfaction that is no less satisfying because it is queer. The woman of the house may shudder and make unusual efforts to keep it from the children, but she listens avidly to the cook's inside story of the crime that was committed next door and presses for further details. The man may express his horror and indignation and talk of leaving his house and finding another in a less notorious neighborhood, but for years he will point out to his visitors and guests the window of the room where the fell deal was done. Opposite to Mayfield was the home of John Ferguson Stott, who, in addition to being a neighbor of the late Jesse Tressimier, was the employer of his nephew. This gave him an especial title to speak as an authority. It supported him also in his determination to say nothing. "It's bad enough, my dear, to be living in the street where this ghastly crime has been committed. I cannot afford to be dragged into the matter." He was a small, fat man, very bald, and he wore spectacles of great magnifying power. "Ellen says," began his buxom wife. Mr. Stott held up a podgy hand and closed his eyes. "Servants gossip," said he. "Let us keep out of this business. I cannot afford to have my name in the papers. Why, we should have the house full of reporters in no time, and the police too. I had quite trouble enough over the dog's license ever to want to see the police again." He sat soberly in his place before the window, glaring out at the darkening street. A light flitted to and fro in one of the upper windows of Mayfield, came and went, and came again. The police were searching. He was interested. Tomorrow, when he met the men at Toby's, he would be able to say, "They were still searching old Trasmier's house. I saw them last night. The house is just opposite to mine." Presently the light disappeared for good, and he turned to his wife. "What did Ellen say?" "Ring for her." Ellen was a parlour maid, grown of a sudden from the merest cipher in the great sum of parlour maids to an isolated and important factor. "I am sure it gives me the shivers to talk about it, sir," she said. "Little did I ever think I should be mixed up in a case like this. I am sure that I'd die if I was ever called into court to give evidence." "You will not be called into court," said Mr. Stott decisively. "This must go no farther. Do you understand that, Ellen?" Ellen said she did, but she seemed in no way pleased that she was to be spared the painful publicity. "I've had a toothache for past fortnight." "You should have it out," said Mr. Stott. An opportunity for advising sufferers to have their teeth extracted is one which no normal man can miss. It's always best to deal drastically with a decaying tooth. "Out with it, my girl." "Well?" "It comes about 11:30 and goes off at 2. I could set the clock by it." "Yes, yes," said Mr. Stott testily, his interest in Ellen's misfortune ended. "But what did you see at Mayfield?" "I usually sit at the window until the pain is gone," said Ellen, and Mr. Stott resisted the temptation to tell her that that was the very last place in the world she ought to sit, "and naturally anything that happens in the street I see. The first night I was sitting there, I saw a little motor car drive up to the front of the house. A lady got out." "A lady?" "Well, she might have been a woman," admitted Ellen, "but she got out, opened the gates, and drove into the garden. I thought that was funny, because Mr. Trasimier hasn't a garage, and I knew there was nobody staying with him." "Where did the car go?" "Just into the garden. There's plenty of room for it, because it's not exactly a garden, more like a yard than anything. I think she took the car near the house and put out all the lights. Then she went up the steps and opened the door. There was a light in the passage the first night, and I saw her taking the key out before she shut the door. She hadn't been in the house a few minutes before I saw a man on a bicycle coming along the road. He jumped down and propped the machine against the curb. What struck me about him was the funny way he walked, the sort of queer little steps he took. He was smoking a cigar. "Where did he go?" asked Mr. Stott. "Only as far as the gate, and leant on it smoking. By and by he threw away his cigar, and lit another, and I saw his face. It was a Chinaman." "Good God!" said Mr. Stott. The mental picture that conjured of a Chinaman lighting a cigar in the vicinity of Mr. Stott's stately home was a particularly revolting one. Just before the policeman came along, he went back to his cycle and rode away. But after the policeman had passed, he came back again and stood leaning on the gate until the front door of the Mayfield opened. Then he sort of slunk back to his bicycle and rode in the opposite direction. I mean, opposite to the way he had come. He had hardly got out of sight before I saw the lady come down and open the gates. Soon after, she brought out the car, got on, closed the gates again, and drove away. And then I saw the Chinaman riding behind and pedaling like mad, as if he was trying to catch up to the car." "Extraordinary," said Mr. Stott. "This happened once?" "It happened every night. Friday was the last night," said Ellen impressively. "The lady in the car, the Chinaman, and everything. But on Sunday night 2 Chinamen came, and one went into the garden and was there for a long time. I knew the other was a Chinaman because he walked so curiously. But they didn't come on bicycles. They had a car which stopped at the far end of the street." "Remarkable," said Mr. Stott, and stroked his smooth face. Ellen had finished her story, but was reluctant to surrender her position as news gleaner. "The police have been taking things away from the house all day," reported the observer. "Boxes and trunks. The girl at Pine Lodge told me that they are leaving there tonight. They have been keeping guard in the house ever since the murder." "Very, very extraordinary. Very remarkable," said Mr. Stott. "But I don't think it is any of our business. No, thank you, Ellen. I should certainly have that tooth out." "You mustn't be a baby. And American dentistry has reached such a high level of efficiency that—" Ellen listened respectfully but nervously and went up to her room to plug the aching molar with Dr. Bilberry's curate. It seemed to Mr. Stott that his head had scarcely touched the pillow before there came a knock upon the panel of his bedroom door. "Yes," he said fiercely, in case it was a burglar who was in this polite manner seeking admission to his chamber. "It's Ellen, sir. They're there." Mr. Stott shivered, and conquering an almost irresistible desire to pull the bedclothes over his head and pretend that he had been talking in his sleep, he got reluctantly out of bed and pulled on his dressing gown. As to Mrs. Stott, she never moved. She went to bed, as she had often said, to sleep. "What is it, Ellen? Waking me up at this time in the morning?" asked Mr. Stott irritably. "They are there, sir, the Chinamen. I saw one getting through the window," said the girl, her teeth chattering to the serious disturbance of Dr. Bilberry's curate. "Wait a moment until I get my stick." Mr. Stott kept hanging to his bed rail a heavily loaded cane. He had no intention of going nearer to Mayfield than the safe side of his dining room window, but the holding of the stick gave him the self-confidence of which he was in need. Cautiously the girl let up the blind of the dining room window and unfastened the catch. The sash slid up noiselessly and gave them an uninterrupted view of Mayfield. "There's one," whispered Ellen. Standing in the shadow was a figure. Mr. Stott saw it plainly. They watched in silence for the greater part of half an hour. Mr. Stott had an idea that he ought to telephone for the police, but refrained. In the case of ordinary burglars, he would not have hesitated, but these were Chinese, notoriously clannish and vengeful. He had read stories in which Chinamen had inflicted diabolical injuries upon men who had betrayed them. At the end of the half-hour's vigil, the door of Mayfield opened, and a man came out and joined the other. Together they walked up the road, and that was the last Mr. Stott saw of them. "Very remarkable," said Mr. Stott profoundly. "I'm glad you called me, Ellen. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. But you must say nothing about this, Ellen. Nothing. The Chinese people are very bloodthirsty. They would think no more of putting you into a barrel full of sharp-pointed needles and rolling you down a hill than I should think of lacing my shoes." So Maple Manor kept its grisly secret, and none knew of Yearling's visit to the house of death, or his search for the tiny lacquer box wherein Jessie Trasmere kept a folded sheet of thin paper elegantly inscribed in Chinese characters by Yearling in his own hand. The end of chapter 11.